let's go.
Cheers, Andrew. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And as the headline act, it said, we're going to explore here creative bravery. And I think the session is really going to allow us to explore, problems and holding problems, and also looking at this whole concept of uncertainty in what is a very, very uncertain world at the moment. We are also going to experiment and put ourselves into positions of vulnerability as facilitators and experiment with some tools, some digital tools, which we're hoping will work, but if not, we'll find workarounds. We're all creative people in the space, and we can find creative solutions to any issues that we come up against, I am sure. So welcome everybody. I'm Divi Shanela. I'm the director of a creative learning foundation called Creativity, Culture and Education. And I've been working at CCE for a very long time, and obviously I have the best job in the world. Really always keen to explore creativity and what that means for young people. And as Andrew said in his introduction, creativity is needed more than ever. And I hope this session allows us to experiment and to think about experimenting and to leave today feeling inspired to continue to do that. So Paul, do you want to do a quick introduction?
So I'm Paul. I'm the founder and director of a company called Hidden Giants. We're based in Glasgow, as you can probably tell, and we work in Scotland, but we also work internationally. And within the context of this conversation, I'm also one of the founders of the Creative Bravery Festival, that was an international learning festival that happened in September, which hopefully will have an ongoing presence as we move through this crazy world. And that is me.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to start. I'm just going to quickly share my screen with me. One second. So, can everybody see that? Okay, this is a digital mural, and this is an exercise where we're going to work with one of the digital tools that I said we will experiment with. I'll cut and paste the link to this mural in the chat space in just a second. I'm just going to move something out of the way to allow me to do that. So Mural is a digital whiteboard. Has anybody used Mural before? Anybody used Mural before? Oh, okay, I'll just stick this in the chat, bear with me. It's not going to let me do that for the minute, bear with me. Anyway, I'll stick it in the chat in just a second. So this is a digital mural, and what you can do with it, I'll stick the link in the chat space. What you can do with this digital mural is you, on the right-hand side here, is a little zoom function. So you can zoom in using this, and you can zoom out. You can just move these images wherever you like. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to just take a moment to reflect personally on what the last 6 months have felt like. And in doing that, I want you to just look across the images here that are in the mural. And I'd like you to select 3 which you think reflect how the last 6 months have felt like for you, and then just move them into one of the empty spaces in the mural like this. Okay. Now, if you are on your phone, you may not be able to do this. So we can maybe do a chat and zoom in and out. Or if you can't access the mural, what I would suggest you do is you go into your mind's eye and you think about 3 images yourself, which you think have reflected the last 6 months, and we'll get an opportunity to share those in a bit. Okay, so bear with me. I'm just going to post this into the chat space. I need to stop sharing to do that because it for some reason isn't letting me. Okay, so can everybody see the link there? So click into the link. If anybody's having any problems, just send us a chat and we'll help out. So you have about 5 minutes to do this.
Hi, I found the app and I've downloaded the app, but it's only given me an option to sign in already, as if I've already got an account. But
you shouldn't need to go into account. If you just click into the mural, if you just click into the link, it should take you straight there. You don't have to sign into Mural in effect. If you click into the link that's in the chat space, it should hopefully take you straight there.
All right, okay, thanks.
Hi Lisa, if you click the link in the chat and then I can see where you're talking about the sign-in option, there's a pink button that should say enter as visitor, and if you click that you can bypass the login. Great.
Brilliant. So if you're done, you can maybe see what other people are starting to gather in terms of their 3 images. Just have a little bit of a nosy around and see what other people are coming up with.
Diane?
Yeah.
If you want to add something of your own, do I need to find an image of that?
If you want to add an image of your own from that isn't here on the picture, you can. I think you can you could copy and paste an image in.
Okay.
But if you just want to select one of the images that's there, you just literally click and hold on it and manipulate it to one side.
Okay, thank you.
So another minute or so. You can see everybody's really working hard. Okay, so shall we stop there? And if you come back to the shared screen function, I can share my screen with you all. It's still there now, but you might have clicked out of that and gone back into your own version of this. Can everybody see that? Brilliant. Okay. Does anybody want to reflect or share any of their images? I'm happy to start. This is mine down here. I'll share mine first. This is me down here in the bottom corner, right down here. And the images that I chose, the first one is a boat, and I think there's been a lot of analogies recently about everybody being in the same boat, and I feel a bit aggrieved about that. I think we're all in a similar storm, but we're not all in the same boat. So I think I've been reflecting on what boats I've been in and what boats other people have been in, and exploring that. I think the second image is an image of the beach. And I think this for me is about opportunity and about opening up space to explore new things and to see some positives from what's been a really, really challenging time. And the last one for me is this one, which is 3 bags filled with air. And I think this is about me thinking about what have I been carrying around in these bags, and is it just a lot of hot air? And could I have been carrying more useful things around in these bags and attending to different things? So that's my 3. Others want to share?
Claire, go ahead.
Thank you.
Hi. So I chose the Dalek because I think, particularly at the beginning of lockdown, as a family, we were genuinely quite frightened, frightened for our vulnerable members of our family and not knowing what was going to happen. And it was a real palpable fear, which I think is represented by the Dalek. I chose the beach, the same image as Di. I chose that one because in some ways, COVID has been a positive thing in that it's made us as a family calmer, less stressed, and a slower pace of life, a more relaxed outlook. It's changed the way that we see things, I think, in a positive way. And I chose the Lego creative boat, not really because it was a boat, because it was a creative piece. And I think we've learned to make do and mend and to do different things with the things that we have rather than trying to constantly strive for new things. So it's made us a bit more creative as a family.
That concept of repurposing things, yeah, really good.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else want to share?
Hi, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
I'm not quite sure I can work out what screen I'm meant to be on, but I know what images I picked.
That's
so
brilliant.
Rubik's Cube that was all nicely complete.
Okay.
Because I think
I'm
somebody who's I like things to be quite meticulously planned, and obviously that's quite difficult in these circumstances. The other image I picked was the fountain with the water squirting up from the pavement, and that's that like unpredictable thing. So as a freelance artist, I've had lots of projects either cancelled or reimagined multiple times. And then I've got Marmite, because for all this is really challenging for the way I like to work. There have been some positives. So in terms of really thinking about what is my priority, why am I an artist? Why do I want to work with children and young people? How can I best kind of make a difference?
Okay. Thank you. Any others?
Hi.
Hi, Hannah.
So, like the person before, I'm not entirely sure I'm scrolling around the screen properly, but I can remember my images. I chose the beach, like many people actually. I'm lucky to live near the sea, so to be honest, having a daily walk along the beach was the biggest pleasure, and also often sharing that time with with maybe family members, like my daughter, walking with my daughter or something, and the conversations that we had in those times were special. I chose the pile of bags, plastic bags. I hadn't read them as being full of air. I had read them as being kind of a pile of bin bags, really, which feels a bit like domestic life in lockdown, when you kind of start delving into the back of the cupboards that you haven't been into for years. And it felt a bit of a kind of clutter, sort out time of recycling, reusing, giving away, sorting out domestics, I suppose. And the other one I chose was the sign that said, the street sign that said business open as usual. Not because I run a high street shop or something, but because it just, to be honest, I felt like, although everything was going on around me, I felt like I was very lucky in many ways, but I continued working constantly, and I realized that's a very lucky position. But so I actually feel like I worked really hard, and I was quite tired by the end of that first big phase of months that we had. So business open as usual, laptop open as usual, I would probably say, for me.
Okay, any final shares?
Yeah, I don't mind sharing.
Thanks, Lisa.
Mine's to the left of the screen, kind of out of the white box. It's the Tigger and the light and the tape measure. So the tape measure, because you kind of measure things up a little bit during lockdown, and you know, some of us put on a little bit of lockdown weight, so that reminded me of that. Less said about that, the better, I think. Tigger, I think, because of the energy, and what do you do with that energy? What do you do with that creativity and that wanting to get out there and wanting to kind of be with the kids and be creative? And the light, the flower light one, I liked it, but also I think it kind of challenged me and needing that light bulb moment of, oh, I know I can get the kids to do this remotely, or I can do, you know, this, that and the other, or just thinking of new ways to solve problems, I guess, and still teach.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So some similarities in terms of images, but some different interpretations of them, but a clear sense of you know, wanting to be outdoors, enjoying conversations with people, enjoying being with family, making choices about what we do. Repurposing, I think, was another really strong feeling of reusing, repurposing, being creative. Time to sort of focus a bit on domestic life and decluttering. I think charity shops must have been overrun or continue to be overrun with the life laundry that a lot of us have been doing. But I think, again, you know, that sense of, yeah, business has been as usual for some people, and it has been, you know, pretty intense and full on. And had I been able to choose another image, I think it would have been an image of the anvil, because I think one of the things, I've been extremely busy and I've had to do lots of crafting, improving, finding new ways of working and new skills. So I think that's been a really important motif, certainly of my last 6 months. But again, this is a really interesting way of just having a conversation with a group of people, and using pictures can change the conversation. We could have just asked you to talk about this in small groups, but, you know, changing the conversation and looking at this, there were a lot of silver linings coming through as well. It wasn't just all about this being, you know, difficult and a terrible time. You know, there were silver linings that people were sharing, that quality time, those wonderful conversations, you know, the things that we've done and learned and shared and thought about in the last 6 months. And I hope as we go through the session today, we'll come back and circle in on some of these really important things we've explored already. I'll stop sharing. We'll share this mural with you as well at the end of the session. So if anybody wants to play and have a look at it afterwards, you can do so. I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you. Paul.
I suppose I would just like to say that mural as well is a really effective online tool. I mean, Di just demonstrated a small part of it, but you can do so many things, embed videos and polls, and it becomes a sort of one-stop place for anything to happen. So just to say that. Okay, so one of the things that Hidden Giants has been doing since really the very, very beginning of lockdown is bringing random strangers together in Zoom rooms. And it's been really interesting seeing what happens when you bring people who would never normally meet in the physical world, come together in the virtual world and have conversations about stuff. And so we're going to model a wee bit of that just now, and we're going to channel Oprah Winfrey. Who would have thought it? Oprah, 20 years ago, somebody asked her, what do you know for sure? And ever since that point, she's become totally fixated on that one question, which I find really interesting from a sort of creative perspective, how sort of one question drives the next 20 years of what you pay attention to. But anyway, she's wrote a new book. It's out for Christmas, I think. And it's all about what Oprah knows for sure. And I have begun to ask it to our schools and practitioners that I work with, because I'm quite interested in this idea of certainty in a world that's full of uncertainty. And I sort of play with both. It's not one or the other. But in this exercise, we're going to look at this idea of what do you know for sure? Okay. And within the context of this conversation, I want you to think about what do you know for sure when working with children and young people, okay, because that's what we're talking about. And what we're going to do is go into a quite quick breakout room for about 5 minutes, I think. And I just want you to have a conversation with these people who you've probably never met before. And I know that that's okay. It's actually really good, okay? And I want you to base the conversation on what do you know for sure when working with children and young people, all right? And it's simple as that. And after that, we talk about it. Does that make sense? Great. Danny, is it all right to have 2 breakout rooms? Perfect. It's funny having a stage manager, because throughout lockdown, I've just done all this by myself, but having Danny here, it's like, whoa, a whole new world.
Okay, so do you want to open the breakout groups? Fabulous. Claire, you don't seem to be in a room. Oh, super.
Super magic.
There we go. So there's just 3 of them in each, but
Aye, we're doing dreadful at, sorry. Aye, I was going to say we're doing dreadful at timekeeping today, aren't we?
We're really bad. But because we're going with...
So that's back, Danny? Yeah, all good. Okay, just a bit of reflection on that. Would anybody like to share, Katerina, in breakout rooms we were talking about what do you know for sure, and what do you know for sure when within our work with children and young people? So just to let you know, that's what we were speaking about. Anybody like to tell us what you were talking about in your groups?
Hi,
Thanks,
I was
Elizabeth.
I was with Aileen and Lisa, and we were talking about, well, first of all, we had a good laugh saying that we're not certain of very much. We talked about uncertainty being okay, that children are curious and that we could learn a lot by taking some of that on board ourselves. We talked about them teaching us, that's kind of linked into curiosity, but also that every day is a fresh start, or every time we meet a child or a young person, it's a fresh start, and we've got to remember that that's important. Yeah, it was basically that we want to be more like them.
That's brilliant.
Really nice. I'll share a document after this conversation in the chat box. It's all about pedagogies of uncertainty, and it's about how do we introduce uncertainty into our classrooms and teaching, which sort of connects to that idea of just what you were saying. That's lovely. What about the other group? What were you saying?
Hi. So we talked about well, we started off by saying nothing is certain, and we kind of got a bit locked in that, and we kind of enjoyed that, being locked in that. But then we did talk about the fact that maybe you can be certain that nothing will be the same the second time. So no matter how many times you go in with a set plan, it'll turn out completely differently with different children. And also that all children respond differently to everything that we do as well. And that you can be certain that that kind of differentiation, I suppose, will always happen, and that fuels the creativity, but it's part of the excitement of it, but it's something you can be certain of, that you can't be certain how everybody's going to react, if that makes sense. Is that fair, guys, from my team? Help.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Cool.
I think it makes perfect sense. The only certainty is uncertainty. And even though it makes sense, quite often I don't see it because we like things to be certain. And there's a real tension. And I think what COVID has brought, 2020 has exposed that tension that we have in society about the idea of loving or craving certainty. Oh, what's the weather like on Tuesday? Where actually it's like, well, what we need to be better at is dealing with uncertainty. Because if we follow the lead of our children who love uncertainty, then us adults would be more and better prepared for what this world is and what this world is emerging to be. And so it's really interesting that you pick up the idea of the newness that children bring, the freshness that they bring, the idea that there isn't a problem, there's only a process of finding some sort of solution to it. It's really beautiful. And if we hold on to that as the certain, then it allows the uncertainty to be managed and cherished and tolerated, and all these things, which I'm going to share this document with you. You'll understand after you read it that I'm now talking about. How did
to add to that as well, I think that certainty around children will be different. I think that's really powerful as well, because I think if you know that every time you meet a group of children or a group of people, the only thing you can be certain of is that they're going to be all different individuals. And if you're attending to their individual needs and you're focusing on the present and the here and now, you can be certain about that. You can and you can look them in the eye and develop a program of work which responds to the minute you're in, not where you want to be in 6 weeks' time, because in 6 weeks' time, who knows where we're going to be. And I think that tolerating uncertainty, I think it's created a real richness around practice, because people have had to live in the moment a lot more and respond to the things that are right in front of them on a daily basis. And I think that creates all sorts of opportunities for creative potential. And I think Paul talked about this notion of pedagogies of uncertainty, and we talk a lot in our work at CCE about the creative habits of mind. And when you look at the pedagogies of uncertainty and you look at the sorts of creative habits we want to develop in our young people that are innate, and we need to develop them and encourage them on a daily basis, being inquisitive, imaginative, persistent, the pedagogies of uncertainty are actually just the same thing. And as Paul said, we need to find ways to embrace that as adults, because it's the space that children absolutely love to be in, and it's where real brilliant learning takes place.
And one of the things that I think we can do when embracing uncertainty is go into Zoom rooms with complete and utter strangers, because what's going to happen is uncertain, and it sometimes feels uncomfortable, but it's really important. And it's one of these gains that I think COVID has brought, is the idea that you can wake up in the morning and by the end of the day, you've interacted and spoken to people that you would never normally meet from opposite ends of the world. And they potentially have brought a complete and utter challenge to the way that you think. And it doesn't happen enough. The world that we are living in, it's such a sort of echo chamber of thoughts that are brought by social media. I think what Zoom does is say, by the way, there's uncertainty as long as you jump into it. It's something that we've been doing since the beginning of lockdown, this group called AOB, and AOB is about saying there is no agenda until the people who come into the space at 4 o'clock every Thursday set that agenda. And there's something really empowering about that level of uncertainty, because it removes this idea that somebody else is in control of our conversations. We're in control of our conversations, just like those beautiful examples of walking down the beach. You control those conversations with your daughter or whoever. And that level of uncertainty brings so much, I would argue, hope and tenderness and connection and all these things that potentially are missing. But we have to embrace the idea of uncertainty by focusing on what we're certain of, because the certainty is usually the thing that makes it comfortable. Cool. I'm going to hand over to Di, I think. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. So again, we're going to use some different digital tools. And again, these are being in an uncertain world months ago and continuing to manage uncertainty. I've tried to bring some certainty to that by finding new ways of exploring, finding new ways of communicating, finding new ways of being creative in a Zoom space, and tools like Mural and Menti, which some of you might have come up against before, are really interesting tools to use to, in effect, in an exercise, in an activity like we're doing today, but also with young people as well. They can be really, really powerful tools. So I'm going to just share my screen. And me. So what I want you to do is I want you to spend a couple of minutes just exploring this question, to think about in our work with children and young people, what problems exist. Okay, so we'll focus on the problems only. And what I'd like you to do is to use your phone or your tablet or your computer and go to www.menti.com. And when you get there, key in the code 817964 and respond to this question. So in our work with children and young people, what problems exist? Give me a thumbs up if you're managing to get into Menti. Super, that's brilliant. I tolerated a little bit of uncertainty then, but I thought maybe it's not working. So I wanted a bit of certainty around it. So type in your responses. Okay, another minute and then we'll reflect on this. So what patterns can you see? What similarities are there? What patterns or similarities can we see?
I think it seems a lot about sort of communities not working together because of things that are being imposed on them. So that's what, like, the community of the school staff and the families of the children who attend that school. It's the community of kind of cultural organizations working with schools, cultural organizations working with artists, but then also more basic human needs that kind of supersede all this. So children's well-being broadly.
Okay. Any others? Any others? Any outliers? Any outliers? Any things which are sort of standing out as being different from? I like the concept of adults. You know, they're seeing some of the problems are around adults and persuading adults to follow children's lead. So an awareness there that, you know, children really can be, you know, part of the solution if we spend more time attending to them and listening to them. There's issues there of finding student voice. Time, I think time is an interesting one. I think time has always been a challenge in our work, and I think it will continue to be. It's maybe more apparent in COVID, but I think it's always been present. Certainly in my experience of working in education for the last 20 years, that's been the thing which has always been a challenge or a problem. Okay. So we'll share the outcomes from this Menti with you. Paul, do you want to add anything into this before we move on?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we face at the moment, probably within our own work, within the schools and in society, is that there's this idea of the super complexities, which is what many of these things are. Although hunger is sort of a simple word, the super complexities that go into the idea of children in Britain being hungry is absolutely massive, and obviously more of them. And it goes back to this question: what do I do? What can I do? What do we do? And then when you put it against other massive things like Brexit and Trump and climate change and so on and so on and so on, we get into these like massive, like what we call big P, big politics, which quite often disable us, because you often reach a point going, but I can't do anything about that. Or what I can do is sort of so small, it doesn't have any impact. And so what we talk about is the small P's. And these are the small politics that we can sort of grasp hold on and do something about. And it's how do we, as a community, then begin to do that more often and in more places. And I would argue that we all can be doing more. It's just what we're doing is probably, or has to be, different from what it was before, which is where I think it's useful within this conversation is about the people who should be directing us are our children and not adults. And it was me who put down adults, because I think almost all problems that I find within the system, you probably trace them back to adults, and you don't trace them to children. It's just, it seems that they're an easy target. And it's how do we engage our system within that type of conversation, where I always say, I am the problem, I am the solution, but I have to start with me being the problem, part of the problem. I read a beautiful book recently called The Coddling of the American Mind, which sets up this idea that as adults, we're too quick to rush in to be well-intentioned. And as a result of our well-intentions, we mess it up for our children, because we forget that our children need to go through all the hardships and all the pain and all the falling out of trees and all the stuff that comes with dealing with uncertainty and being in uncertainty. And we do it out of like goodness, but our goodness needs to stop, which becomes a really weird thing. And so teachers quite often say, so Paul, in this time of great uncertainty, you're saying we need to introduce more uncertainty, and also you're telling me to stop being good. And I'm a bit like, yeah. And so it's just interesting because a lot of the stuff that you're putting down is all the stuff that I talk about, and it's about how do you delve into that in a way that's useful, and we start to nudge people in different directions. But anyway, so what we're going to jump into now is another conversation that we're going to do in breakout rooms, which builds on this. So it's important that we've noticed what has emerged, and it's important that we're paying attention to what is emerging. So I'm going to ask this other question that I've been asking now for a while. I'm really interested in what currently doesn't exist, but is needed now more than ever. Okay, so what currently doesn't exist, but is needed now more than ever? Yeah, and we're just going to go into breakout rooms. I just want you to consider that question for a minute. I would sort of like encourage you to look at some of these things that are coming up, because potentially it can connect to some of these things. But I just want you to have a conversation with a group of people who you probably have never met before about what's needed, okay? And then we're going to have a conversation about what that means. So, is it all right, Danny, to stop sharing this?
Yeah, I'll stop sharing this.
Perfect. So Danny, is it all right to go into breakout rooms maybe for about 5-6 minutes, something like that? I'm going to have that conversation.
We've caught up, sort of.
Let's do feedback. So what is needed now more than ever but doesn't currently exist? Who would like to start us off?
I'll speak up for breakout room 1. So we were talking about how everybody was saying getting back to normal is the priority, but actually maybe now we've got an opportunity to do it differently and make a new narrative. And talking about the lack of creative roaming, having a chance to really kind of get children to explore, experience unpredictable things and have a bit more freedom, and trying to fight against this with the fear that the teachers have of all of the learning that's previously been lost, but actually maybe they haven't lost that because they did have a bit more creativity at home. So yeah, really talking about how we could make a new narrative of a new way of doing it.
Amazing, Jennifer. Let's talk about all that in a minute. The other breakout room, would you like to share first before we talk about them?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. We talked a lot about the lack of parental support that we were finding. So, you know, we can send things home, we can try and kind of zoom in, we can try and do all of these, send creative boxes, do all of the things, strategies that we're doing. But unless there is that parental kind of support, then that becomes really difficult. But we were also talking about, you know, some parents are trying to work themselves and trying to homeschool and trying to, it's, you know, it's very difficult. Obviously we were talking mainly there with the lockdown, but I think even when it goes to, you know, we don't have after school club at my school at the moment, we don't have, and we are relying on a lot of parental support really, and I think that's what we were talking about earlier, wasn't it? Those adults buying into, particularly with the creative arts, particularly the importance of those things as well.
Great. Is there any other responses from hearing what the other group were talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting talking about reimagining the narrative, because when we were talking about parental support, we were saying kind of like it's not the majority of parents who it's lack of want, it's lack of resource. And, you know, I was just thinking there that do parents value the things that we are teaching their children in school? And is the curriculum something that is actually their priority? Because, you know, I was talking about my mum's neighbour who's a primary school teacher, who's trying to prepare lessons, who's trying to teach her 2 children, and her focus shifted to their well-being, their connectedness with nature, physically moving. Like, what are our priorities and where are they coming from? Because parents will only buy in if they think that it is in the best interest of their children.
And one of the things we've noticed, certainly from many conversations, and Paul, you might have noticed the same thing, but many of the conversations we've been having internationally with different groups and networks of people, is this sense of parents expected to become the teacher, and how that's been just such a challenging space for parents to inhabit. And where I think if we sort of reimagine that as, you know, how can we create opportunities for parents and children and families to learn together? So that much more exploratory piece, which, you know, uses the world, the resources around you, that's much more, I think, expansive than perhaps, you know, the immediate attention on sending things out and, you know, doing things digitally and having digital worksheets. And actually, where we've seen the most traction and the most excitement happen is in environments where it has been much more inquiry based, and it has been much more about co-learning as children, as families, across age ranges as well. So those opportunities to experience the outdoors in a different way, that's where we've seen the most, I suppose, the most traction. And also, I think where teachers and educators have really taken the opportunity and had their time to be able to, you know, do one-to-ones with children, and really for the children to be noticed through that.
I think the idea of values is quite interesting. I'm in an echo. No, I'm better now. Okay. I think a lot of it comes down to the assumptions that people have about what learning is. And we live in a society where, unfortunately, learning still happens at school. And that's a massive assumption, but it's an assumption that's pretty embedded. And what I had hoped, and what I still hope COVID has done, that there are brilliant schools who have completely addressed that assumption by saying, well, what does learning look like in your home? And so we work with a school up in Orkney, and the lots of farming families, fishing families, as you can imagine, island community. And their challenge was, what learning happens on the farm? Where does numeracy occur on the farm? Where do you find literacy in the field? And the parents suddenly went, oh, I know this. This is my lived experience. And the parents had to be challenged on what their assumption was, because their best learning happened in a field. Their daughter's best learning happens in a field. There was a brilliant quote recently where I think she was like 9 or 10, where she now says that school gets in the way of farming. And it's really interesting, because she's going, but I can do all the stuff that I need to do, but I do it on my farm. And it's those types of conversations. And so we come into a conversation about reimagining. We have to then go, well, what are the assumptions and key beliefs and values that need reimagined? And that's the responsibility of schools, unfortunately. And so rather than finding the sticky plaster to all this to create some myth of normality, which is the most horrific thing, because normality is a horrible, horrible existence for a lot of people, we have to go, well, what are the things that we need to draw attention to? So one of the things, I don't know, you probably have done this if you know Di, draw what learning looks like. See, the minute a child draws what learning looks like, and then a parent draws what learning looks like, you get a good understanding of what their values are when it comes to school and education. They're the things that usually we need to tap into and go, but why is that? Because that parent who goes to work in the care home, or goes to work in Tesco, or goes to be a social worker or whatever, their understanding of learning should sit within their lived experience. But we never allow that to come in, because we still base our education system on this traditional hierarchical, this happens, it's a nonsense. And so there's real opportunities. And I love the idea of creative roaming. Like, the idea of creative roaming seems like a beautiful idea to explore. And you go, well, what would that look like to roam? Do you know what I mean? So whoever said that, if it's something that you do, I would love to know like what that actually looks like, or if it's something that you've just made up. I almost want to follow that. Well, I do want to follow it, because it sounds quite exciting.
I'll warn you, if you're in a school or you're a teacher and you ask your children to draw what learning is, you will end up holding a big stick, because it always seems to teach you holding a stick. Don't know why that is. There you go.
there's lots of exercises that we do. The purpose of them is to unearth some of these assumptions that we carry about the values that exist within our system. So drawing learning is one of them. Another one we use, which is slightly itchier, is we ask people to go around and map the unwritten rules of the school. And it's quite interesting what happens when people start to map the unwritten things that everybody knows but nobody talks about, because it's usually those things that are stopping things change. So that's an interesting one. There's things like the Venn diagram, where you do a Venn diagram, and on one side you say, what can adults do? On the other side, what can children do? And then in the middle, what do we share? And teachers usually go, oh, it's brilliant. We design the curriculum together and we decide sort of what topic is. And then when the kids do it, the kids put down, we decide if we have pizza or sausages for lunch. And that's it, that's their decision. And so it opens up this brilliant conversation about, are we listening to each other? Or are we just on this sort of train track by ourselves that nobody's on your train? So things like that are interesting, but if we are serious about finding a completely different way of organizing things, we need to get better at stopping. And this is the key problem that we have at the moment, that we're all just pretending that we know what's happening, and we're just keeping going. And I go, I don't know if I've stopped enough, and I don't know if I've listened enough, and I don't know if we are able to apply that learning that has come from lockdown and continues to come from COVID. It's just this myth that if you just keep going, the productivity will move us, and it won't, which is where I put in this document about the pedagogies of uncertainty. Have a look at that. It's interesting how that document sets up. This is pre-COVID, that piece of theory was put out. How by introducing uncertainty into a system, actually there's lots of huge benefits that will come from it. I should also say I'm not afraid of falling silent in Zoom rooms. I quite like silence. Okay, so it's not like I'm struggling or embarrassed that I don't know what to say. I quite like silence, because we're all processing and somebody might then say something.
I'll just jump in. Is that okay?
Of course.
Yeah. So just the links between, as the conversation was earlier, uncertainty, being comfortable with uncertainty, and then that I was I think Claire and Claire, I was the person that said, I think creative roaming. Was I? Can I say that I was? So uncertainty, and where that then in my work, as I'm a sort of an artist practitioner, the role of chance and being comfortable with chance and a welcoming chance, which essentially is also kind of clowning. It's kind of opportunity and clowning, and that's essentially creativity. So it's kind of all the same thing, it's just got different names. And that's roaming. That's that roaming, the wilderness of the imagination, where it's not prescribed, it's not a set of steps that you have to simply go through to get to the conclusion that everyone needs you to get to. It's genuine roaming, imaginatively. So I'd like to have further conversations about that, if that's all right. I can get maybe in touch with you at another time.
Yeah. And also we've got time now, because what I would bring into the conversation is the idea of attention rather than intention. And to roam, you have to pay attention to where you're going. You might know that you want to reach Inverness, but if you don't know how to get there, you have to pay attention to the landscape that will enable you to move through your journey. And there's a big difference, because what our school system is absolutely swamped by are intentions. So the intention to cover the curriculum in this week, there's always this sort of, it's fixed. And where I think what your idea of roaming is, or it's good old fashioned improvisation as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you have your scaffold, you have your structure, nobody crashed the bus, feed it. Sorry, Claire, you're going to jump in.
I was just, the context that when Hannah came up with that beautiful phrase about roaming, she kind of said better what the stimulus for that was, that my point was that there's too much at the moment about what currently doesn't exist. I think there's too much of a mindset about getting back to normal. And in schools, it's about, we got to get back to normal. We've got to do what we did before, rather than saying it's different. It's a new world. There's so much opportunity to change that we're kind of obsessed with getting back to how things were rather than embracing the new. And that was what inspired Hannah to talk about the idea of the roaming and exploring the wilderness and that creativity. And we talked about how there's a wonderful opportunity now because of COVID to bring creativity and culture and learning right to the front of the curriculum, which is, you know, one of the things that I'm trying to do in my role with CB Northeast. So yeah, Hannah brought the wonderful creative artistic side to the education bit, and we just kind of worked the conversation from there. But we were saying the same things, I think, just in a different way.
And that's, again, what's really nice about when you bring, you know, people who come from different, you know, spheres together to explore these big topics, but explore them from the concept of practice. So it's really nice that people come to, you know, a similar philosophical outlook, but, you know, they've maybe just described the process in slightly different ways. And I think, you know, I certainly feel that over the last 6 months, you know, in our work, we've been finding too many solutions and just not being comfortable with just living with the problem and exploring the problem and being more inquisitive and imaginative and creating space for that. You know, immediately jumping to, you know, oh, we know what people need. And I think we've reverted a bit back to that and going back into schools, that actually what we're trying to we know what we need, and we need what we assume we need what went before, without really thinking about what we need deeply. And I think conversations like this really allow us to explore more deeply, you know, really understand problems, and really test out the problem before we come to any assumptions about what the solution might be. And that allows us to be vulnerable as adults. You know, it allows us to explore our vulnerabilities and have conversations about that, and to go on that roaming as adults as well, you know, in our own practice, to do some roaming, to do some exploration, and, you know, to let our learners lead us in that space, I think is incredibly exciting. And we've got the chance to do it now because, you know, things are different, so we should in effect use that as a brilliant silver lining.
I've just put in the chat box a piece about Trojan mice, which are another one of my things that I found during lockdown, which has completely changed the way that I understand who I am. And so a Trojan mouse, as you can imagine, is different from a Trojan horse, where the Trojan horse rides into town, an army comes out, wins the war quite quickly, but then just replaces a system with another system that is brutal, that is patriarchal, it's hierarchical, it doesn't do the thing that it should have done, which is allow the system to change. And so what the Trojan mice do is the Trojan mouse acts in quite often a way that's unnoticed, but it's informed, it's testing, it's experimental, and it's just doing its own wee thing. And if there's enough of these Trojan mice, they will win the war. But the system that they replace the other system with will be participatory, it will be values-led, it will be experimental, it won't be fixed, it will be more democratic. And so there's an interesting sort of metaphor that I am encouraging people to take away, is what would happen if I was a Trojan mouse working in my little corner of the world? And what would happen if all these little Trojan mice started to connect to other Trojan mice to share stories? And what if these stories started to feed into the mainstream? And what if the mainstream started to listen to these stories? Now, this sounds like a sort of pipe dream, but it's a pipe dream that I think is grounded sort of in the theory of Trojan mice, but the theory of these small acts of change have massive impact, where we shouldn't wait for the Trojan horse. The Trojan horse is something like Boris Johnson or Trump or something like that. It's just this big grand statement. And what we need to get better at is owning these little things that we all do and been really comfortable and settled with it and going, yeah, that's what we do. Yep. We don't claim to know everything. We don't claim to have the solution. We don't claim to have a programme that will change the life of all the children. We don't claim to have a programme that will sort out hunger in Britain. But what we will do, our actions that we take have meaning, and will start to change the lives of the people that we work alongside. So the article that I've just put in is really interesting. It's really good. And I would encourage you to think about adopting the role of a Trojan mouse.
I think what's really interesting about it as well, Paul, is it's about having agency about your work as well. It's about feeling a sense of actually empowerment, that actually you can take something and move forward with it when, you know, when there are such huge issues going on and such massive, as you say, societal challenges. You know, being a Trojan mouse actually allows you to take agency, and when young people see you taking agency and creating agency for them, that's when, you know, small pockets of difference can start to be made and people start to notice it, and then more Trojan mice go off in different directions, exploring from a position of knowing but not knowing how. And I think that's a really powerful place to be.
So Paul, have you got time just to talk about anti-fragile, just for like 2 minutes?
Yeah, it's interesting, Hannah, you used the word chance, which I think it ties into this idea of anti-fragile. Comes from a guy called Taleb. Taleb introduces the sort of idea of the opposite of fragile is anti-fragile. He became a bit obsessed about this because he talks about three materials. One is fragile, so it's like bone china. Any pressure or stress that's a put on that, it smashes and it's poof. And so some people think the opposite of that is like resilience or robustness, which he would use plastic as a sort of material to describe that. And plastic, when you drop it, it doesn't break, but it doesn't change. And so he takes it one further and says, well, the opposite of that has to be something that changes. And with pressure, stress, volatility, uncertainty. So he would say that that material is like living ecosystems, or our bodies should be anti-fragile, our tendons and muscles. There's some economic systems that are anti-fragile. Childhood is anti-fragile. If a child is wrapped up in cotton wool and they don't fall out a tree and they don't fall over and hurt their leg, and if they don't have a boyfriend who's horrible and they fall out with that boyfriend, if all these things don't happen, they become really fragile. And it's a disaster, because if we have fragile people in a fragile system, which I would argue we're almost there, we see that they can't deal with the complexities that the system presents on a daily basis, which is what we have. And we're in a mess. And what Taleb would argue is that actually we need to own our anti-fragility and get better at creating anti-fragile systems, which also ties into, which I think the uncertainty documents is a more friendlier way of engaging with this idea of we can grow through uncertainty, we can grow through unknowing, we can grow through actually not knowing, that we need to make sure that we are moving our mindsets into that and being quite comfortable with it. Because there's a lot of people who like strong and stable, but I don't know if you've read Biesta. Biesta is brilliant. Biesta talks about weak and risky, not strong and stable. And weak and risky is a complete and utter provocation and challenge to the way that our education system is set up, that he would argue if a learning process doesn't have weakness at the heart of it, then it doesn't invite participation, it doesn't invite agency, it doesn't allow the child or the teacher to mold and create meaning within that system. And so we argue weak and risky rather than strong and stable. Can be tricky. So yeah. What I'll also do is just put we do a weekly Zoom group that happens on Thursdays at 4 o'clock called AOB. I'll put it in the chat box. Anybody's welcome at any time. You just turn up, you stay here for how long you want. You come next week, you can do whatever. The whole premise is there is no agenda until we set the agenda. So whoever's in the room are the right people, and whatever you bring to the table will be the thing that then is spoken about. Nobody can control the conversation other than the community, which is what we need to ensure that we're developing a belief and confidence in that. So that's there.
Great, thanks. We've got about 5 minutes left.
I just want to say thank you to everybody. I found this session really interesting. I know we've got 5 more minutes and perhaps somebody's got a burning question or something, but yeah, it's given us quite a lot to think about, and just really enjoyed it.
We'd be really interested to know if any of you pick up the mantle of being Trojan mice, you know, what you start investigating.
Do you think it's a choice to be a Trojan mouse, or do you think people might just naturally be Trojan mice?
I think it's an active choice.
Active choice.
I also think that some people have a calling, like see when you're working with a group of kids, you can see the little Trojan mice.
Yeah.
I think there are some adults that absolutely go, no, this is my choice now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just ask about the anti-fragile? What name did you use then?
Talib. But
Talib.
I'm going to find a link. It's just a Wikipedia link, but it's Talib. He's the guy that wrote about the black swan. You might know the black swan, where he sets up this idea of swans are meant to be white, and then when a black one comes along, you're like, what? And it rocks everyone's world because it shouldn't be there. And so he says that there's these massive world events like the Twin Towers that come along, and because we haven't even considered it, then it means that the fallout of it is greater. And so the mindset that we have to get into is that there's things that are going to happen that we can't see. And so it's this idea of, again, not knowing. It goes back to like Rumsfeld quote about there's things we know.
Yeah, don't
Yeah.
know, and the unknown unknowns.
Do you know that? Like, do you know that Rumsfeld quote? The Rumsfeld quote, it was really criticised because it was grammatically incorrect or something, but I carry it everywhere. Yeah. The world is full of known knowns, and we have to get into a mindset of the known unknowns, or even better, the unknown unknowns. What do we not even know? We know. Anyway, anything else before we finish up?
Can I just say it's been really refreshing to have a session where the agenda isn't, you know, very rigid and set, and that there's an opportunity to just creatively bounce ideas off each other and have a chat. I think that's a really brave way to run a session, and it's just so refreshing. So thank you.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks,
really
Claire.
Nice feedback.
When I said at the start I was 100% sure that you go away feeling excited and inspired, I think I was probably right. That's good.
Claire, if I could just say one thing, what I've noticed, which I find quite interesting, is some of the bad stuff that happened in the old world, we've sort of transferred into the technical world. And I'm going, but there shouldn't be hierarchy in a Zoom call. Like, it makes no sense, because you don't have the white man in the suit positioning himself at the end of the big table or standing up in front of all of us. It's like it should be democratized, okay? And I think this Zoom room should have felt like that, where if somebody jumped in sort of 15 minutes ago, I don't think they should have been easy. It shouldn't have been easy to find who the facilitator was or who was in charge, because it should be a community. It should be a conversation. Anyway.
Much like working with children, in so much that quite often the important voice in the room is the kid over there that's got the amazing idea.
Yeah, and it's being really brave and just running with that and just picking up on that. And that's been some of the most engaging creative lessons that I've seen, you know, where a child's come in the morning and has discovered something and they want to share it, and the teacher attends to that and listens to it, and it becomes what happens for the rest of the day. And you know, that they are for me the most wonderful creative lessons, because it takes learning into all new directions. Children feel their voices are important, they have agency. What happens, they can make a difference in their learning environments, their opinions mattered. And I think you're right, I think they are the most exciting sorts of learning environments that I go into, and you know, that requires dealing with uncertainty and not knowing where it's going to go, and just being on a learning journey with your kids and saying, okay, where will this go today? Let's see.